Imagine waking up one day and discovering that the global food system had collapsed, not because of climate change, war, or economic turmoil, but because some bureaucrat with a god complex pressed a big red button labeled culinary monotony, and now, forever, you could only eat one food. One, for the rest of your life. Welcome to What If Horizons, the podcast where we gnaw on absurd realities until the flavor runs dry, or in this case, until your one and only dish goes cold. Let's begin with the obvious horror: choice. The most paralyzing word in the human language when placed next to a menu. Imagine that the last meal you ordered, whether it was a suspicious gas station burrito, your partner's questionable attempt at vegan lasagna, or a hastily assembled peanut butter and jelly sandwich. That's it. That's your food. For life. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner. There is no swapping, substituting, or sneaking in a side salad. You picked wrong, my friend. Welcome to gastronomic purgatory. Suddenly, every meal becomes a predictable, monotonous affair. Your taste buds, those formerly adventurous explorers scaling the heights of flavor Everest, now sit at the base camp of despair, chewing through the same tired texture for the 89th consecutive time. The joy of surprise, the flirtation with spice, the flirtier flirtation with dessert, all gone. You're in a committed relationship with one dish now, and it's starting to feel like a marriage arranged by someone who hates you. Now, let's pause and imagine society trying to adapt. Supermarkets become relics, their once majestic aisles stripped to skeletal rows offering only a single item per customer. And they don't even bother organizing them alphabetically anymore. Why would they? You're here for your one food. You'll walk past endless duplicates of other people's tragic choices. Someone committed to sardines, another soul shackled to canned peaches. You made the regrettable decision to stick with pancakes, and now, well, your mail smells like maple syrup and shame. Cooking shows? Canceled. Replaced with a new hit program called This Again, where celebrity chefs silently weep into their identical mise en place before preparing their signature dish for the 4,000th time. Gordon Ramsay now just screams "why" into a boiling pot of lentils and then turns off the camera. Cultural identity suffers too. Nations once defined by their cuisine now fight diplomatic wars over whose citizens made the least disastrous decision. Italy, heartbroken over its carb-dependent population forced to choose between pizza and pasta, crumbles into culinary chaos. France, too proud to admit that croissants aren't sustainable, tries to spin existential crisis as haute cuisine. Japan emerges relatively stable because, let's face it, sushi is a pretty solid long-term commitment, but even they mourn the death of variety. Soy sauce becomes currency on the black market. And what of nutrition? Dietitians, once reviled for snatching joy from brunch, now become demigods. They're the oracles consulted before final selection. If I choose bananas, will I survive? Is ramen acceptable if I skip the broth? What happens to my kidneys if I go with nachos? Suddenly, kale is no longer mocked, but revered. Its devotees walk among us, smugly chewing their fibrous fate with the serenity of monks. Then comes the psychology. At first, there's denial. People gather in support groups, sobbing into bowls of monotonous mush. I used to love tacos, they whisper, but now I see tortillas in my dreams and wake up screaming. Social media explodes with food nostalgia accounts, photos of past diversity, recipes for meals no one can eat anymore, confessionals titled "My Week with Mac and Cheese," a love story turned horror. Some rebel. Secret supper clubs emerge underground, literally, in basements lit by candlelight and desperation. There, you might trade 3 bites of your eternal oatmeal for a single lick of mango sorbet. Risky? Absolutely. Worth it. Every shiver of citrus bliss says yes. And naturally, the black market thrives. Somewhere in a shady alley, someone in a trench coat opens it to reveal contraband spice racks. Garlic powder. Cumin. Sriracha, priced like diamonds. There are whispers of mythical dealers who sell variety. Actual meals. An omelet with things inside. But tread carefully. The government takes culinary treason seriously. One whiff of basil in the wrong place, and you're on a no-fly list and a one-way ticket to the re-education kitchens. Meanwhile, dating becomes more complicated than ever. Love at first sight is dead. Compatibility now hinges on palate destiny. You meet someone. They're funny. kind, beautiful, and then they tell you, I chose tuna salad. And it's over. Just like that. No amount of pheromones can cancel out the stench of room temperature mayonnaise. Weddings involve separate dining sections. Mixed food couples, brave but doomed. The pancake husband and the pickled herring wife, valiantly pretending this will work. It won't. Not when breakfast becomes a minefield of conflicting smells and existential dread. So what happens next? Do people adapt? Do they evolve? Can humanity survive the greatest flavor famine of all time? At first, governments try to manage the chaos with food registries. Everyone must declare their one food, under penalty of forced tofu. There's paperwork. There are audits. You get an official certificate embossed with your selected dish and a stamp of irrevocable doom. Bureaucrats in beige offices process grilled cheese requests with hollow eyes, whispering, another one, like they've just signed your emotional death warrant. Some people try to outsmart the system. The legal loophole crowd, those same folks who read the terms and conditions of microwaves, begin submitting entries like pizza with infinite toppings or rice, but surprise me daily. But no dice. The algorithm that governs food enforcement is unforgiving. A rogue AI designed by a nutritionist with abandonment issues. It scans each submission with clinical coldness and defaults anything ambiguous to boiled cabbage. And oh, the food police. No longer a metaphor for nagging diet friends. They're real now. Armed with sensory drones, they patrol public spaces, sniffing out flavor violations like bloodhounds with degrees in gastronomy. One grandmother in Arkansas is arrested for adding cinnamon to her oatmeal. Her trial becomes a global sensation. She weeps on the stand, saying, I just wanted to remember what joy tasted like. The jury convicts her in 7 minutes. Cinnamon becomes contraband. The spice must not flow. At home, people begin to unravel. The repetition eats away at them. The avocado cult forms first, green-faced devotees smearing pulp over their bodies while chanting in mushy tongues. They claim to see visions in the pit. Next, the cereal truthers, who insist that dry cereal can be a full meal, a snack, and a lifestyle. Their manifesto is mostly crumbs and desperation. You start to see the psychological divide. On one end are the lifers, those who embrace their one food with the dead-eyed enthusiasm of the resigned. They organize online forums like Mac Forever or Baked Potato Nation. They swap tips on how to make chewing feel fresh. They host digital meetups where no one is allowed to mention flavor. Just texture, just temperature. Anything to trick the mind into believing this isn't slow, edible purgatory. Then there are the crispers, those who chose crunchy things and now feel superior. At least I have mouthfeel, they say, smugly munching their way through eternal carrots. They post photos captioned still crisp, still proud, but most fall into the category of remorsefuls. The ones who made a tragic choice in haste, drawn in by nostalgia or hunger or a moment of weakness, and now live with the consequences. A man in Canada, forever bound to tuna casserole, becomes a minor celebrity after filming a daily vlog titled This Dish, This Prison. Episode 72 is just him sobbing into the steam. Children grow up without variety, and the world watches as entire generations forget what it meant to crave. A 6-year-old girl points to an image of spaghetti and says, "Is that a shoe?" Museums begin curating exhibits of extinct cuisine. The Louvre replaces the Mona Lisa with a looping video of someone cracking a creme brulee. It becomes the most watched piece of digital art in history. But not all innovation dies. Humanity, stubborn as ever, finds strange new ways to express itself through limitation. The food artists emerge, chefs turn performance philosophers who plate the same food 1,000 different ways. A man builds a 7-foot sculpture made entirely of marshmallows. A woman stages interpretive dances based on the emotional trajectory of someone eating broccoli forever. One guy just tapes a single hot dog to a canvas and calls it resignation. Corporations jump in, of course. Brands launch mood plates, custom trays designed to match your daily despair. There's, I can't believe it's still rice in pink. There's oatmeal, but make it gothic. There's a chili-themed cutlery set that screams every time you lift a spoon. And amidst all this madness, somewhere deep in a lab funded by black-budget billions, scientists begin experimenting with sensory simulation pods. You sit inside, You close your eyes, and through neural trickery, you believe you're eating lasagna, or mango sticky rice, or that one soup your grandmother used to make before the world lost its culinary soul. But the pods are expensive, dangerous. Rumors spread that prolonged use leads to flavor rejection syndrome. Your brain starts to hallucinate tastes, even when you're not inside. A man in Berlin screams cinnamon in the middle of a subway and jumps through the emergency exit. Cinnamon, that cursed temptress, again. And what about religion? Entire theologies evolve around the one food. New sects preach that your dish was assigned by divine will, that your cravings are tests, and that to long for pizza when you have chosen couscous is heresy. Their hymns are just melodic chewing. Communion now consists of a single bite of everyone's food, if you're lucky enough to witness it. You begin to wonder, did we bring this on ourselves? Were we too greedy? Did the universe finally snap, shout, pick one, and press the reset button? Philosophers debate. Conspiracy theorists blame vegans. Vegans blame carnivores. Carnivores blame gluten. Gluten shrugs, eternal and invincible. And through it all, you sit, fork in hand, same plate. Again, you try to remember the chaos of buffets, the reckless thrill of just one bite, the sacred alchemy of salt and sugar dancing on your tongue. But all you have now is this. And it's only been day 14. By the third week of dietary damnation, a peculiar societal ritual emerges, the bite of memory. It's not a real bite, of course. That would be treasonous. It's a symbolic moment held annually, where people close their eyes and pretend to taste a food they'll never have again. Families gather around the dinner table, not to eat, but to imagine. Someone says, blueberry pie, and everyone sighs in unison, nodding like survivors of a war none of them remember starting. It's during one of these imaginary feasts that a global movement begins, the flavorists. They are activists, rebels, dreamers, people who refuse to accept the world's culinary monotony. They wear scratch-and-sniff patches under their clothes and meet in abandoned restaurant kitchens, where they read recipes aloud like sacred texts. One flavorist gets arrested for printing a cookbook on edible paper. Her followers eat every page in protest. Critics say they're extremists. Supporters say they're prophets. Either way, they smell like paprika. Governments attempt to suppress this insurgent joy. New laws are passed. No more watching cooking videos. No more food emojis. No more using words like delicious, zesty, or umami. Offenders are forced to spend 40 hours in the plain room, a white cube where the only food allowed is beige-colored tofu, served at room temperature with a spoon made of recycled despair. Meanwhile, tech tries to save us. Startups spring up promising emotion-enhanced eating. The pitch? If you can't change the food, change the context. Their flagship product is a headset that pumps specific emotional stimuli while you eat. Sad jazz for comfort food. Fast-paced EDM if you chose celery. A romantic novella playing in the background if you're stuck with lasagna and want to pretend it's a date. Reviews are mixed. Some claim it helps. Others just weep into their chips, whispering, "It still tastes like cardboard, Dave. I can feel the jazz, but it's still cardboard." Of course, there's always someone who thrives in apocalypse. Influencers rebrand as mono-food gurus. They film themselves eating the same dish for the 300th time while offering faux philosophical takes like, simplicity is the purest form of self-care. Their followers call them brave. Their critics call them sellouts. But no one can deny they've mastered the art of garnishing a grilled cheese with smugness. And let's not forget the scammers. There's a booming black market for flavor laundering. It's an illicit trade where people secretly alter their one food without being caught. Add a dash of vanilla to your oatmeal? Illegal. Dip your chicken nugget in honey mustard? That's 5 years in food jail. Some criminals go further, constructing Frankenstein meals out of permitted ingredients. Mashed potatoes sculpted into sushi, shredded cabbage made to resemble spaghetti. Authorities crack down with grim efficiency. There's no tolerance for creative seasoning. Spice is rebellion. Yet in small, quiet corners of the world, something truly strange begins to happen. People adapt, not out of joy, not because they forget, but because the human mind, desperate for narrative, begins to mythologize their food. A man in Denmark starts referring to his lentils as earth pearls. A woman in Brazil begins every meal with a poem to her eternal empanada. Children raised in the new era no longer complain. They invent stories where broccoli is the food of wizards, or eggs are the last remnant of a fallen civilization. Language changes to accommodate the emotional burden. You no longer ask, "What's for dinner?" because everyone knows the answer. Instead, you say things like, "Are we doing it the usual way, or with the fork upside down today?" Or, "Want to sit near the window while we eat our fate?" And with this cultural shift, an unexpected side effect surfaces: obsessive micro-customization. If you can't change the food, you control the environment. People develop elaborate rituals around temperature, plate shape, even background music. There's a subreddit called r/eatlikeking where users share photos of their one food on tiny gold thrones, lit with candles, served beside motivational quotes like, "Savor what you cannot escape." Some go full performance art. A man in Tokyo begins live-streaming his daily meal, always eaten while dressed as Napoleon. A woman in New York builds a rotating platform that spins her bowl of soup slowly while a choir hums behind her. No one questions these things. They make sense now. Marriage counselors begin asking a new question. Can you emotionally coexist with someone whose one food you hate? Compatibility indexes are updated to include flavor philosophy. Whole dating apps launch for specific dish communities. Tindrizzles for people who chose salad. Rice harmony for those condemned to grains. Some meat cuties are painfully tragic, like the curry devotee and the milkshake loyalist who fall in love but can never share a kiss without gagging. And through it all, a quiet fatigue settles over humanity. The initial hysteria has passed. The flavor revolution has failed. The food wars left no victors, only gastrointestinal survivors. What remains is endurance, chewing without wonder, swallowing with grace. And yet, there are rumors of a man, anonymous, mysterious, who claims he remembers what variety tasted like. Not just remembers, but can recreate it. No one knows his name. They just call him the Palate. He's said to live in an abandoned ice cream factory, where he uses old machines and newer sorcery to craft forbidden meals. Some say he feeds the dying their favorite dishes, one last time. Others say he's a myth. But one thing is certain. If he exists, he is the most wanted man alive. Because while everyone has their one food, everyone also has one memory. One flavor burned into the soul like a candle that won't go out. And given the chance, just one more bite of that lost, perfect thing, they'd risk everything. Eventually, governments stopped enforcing the law with brute force. Not because they found their conscience, but because the prisons were full of soup rebels and croissant cultists. The real weapon became shame. You didn't need to be arrested. You just had to be publicly exposed as a dish deviant. A hidden spice packet found in your pocket? Boom. Your photo appears on digital billboards under the headline. This man added cinnamon to rice pudding. Think of the children. Neighbors reported each other. Families fractured. Your grandfather used to sneak sriracha in the shed, whispered a child, pointing to a suspicious patch of grass. The culinary purity tests reached absurd levels. At airports, travelers were swabbed for garlic residue. At schools, kids were forced to draw loyalty posters, smiling drawings of their designated food, holding hands with slogans like, "One dish, one destiny." A teacher was fired for saying the word flavor profile, replaced with a screen that loops videos of steamed carrots and motivational quotes about compliance. Yet, behind closed doors, quiet revolutions brewed. It started with the chewers, a fringe group who refused to swallow. Their argument? If we never ingest it, it doesn't count. So they chewed their allotted food for hours, tasting but never consuming, walking a legal tightrope so thin it squeaked. Others invented phantom flavor meditation, where they sat in circles, eyes closed, whispering old recipes into the dark. One woman recited her grandmother's borscht instructions so many times, she entered a trance and claimed to taste beets for 0.3 seconds. She was hailed as a prophet. Beets became sacred. And then came the rise of the eternal eaters. This was a new class of influencer. People who didn't fight the system, but embraced it with an almost terrifying intensity. They created content not just about eating their one food, but loving it. Obsessively, erotically, with the passion of a cult leader on a sugar high. A man in Brazil turned his lifelong supply of fried plantains into a lifestyle empire. He slept on banana-shaped pillows, wore yellow robes, and ended every video with the phrase, "Stay crispy, my disciples." He made millions. His fans referred to themselves as plantainials. They tattooed bananas on their arms, not as a food, but as an identity. Other food tribes formed in response. The rice circle, the egg front, the toast ascendancy. These weren't just meals, they were movements. People gathered not to eat together, but to worship their food. Bonfires were replaced with giant toasters. Sermons began with "Blessed be the loaf." Meanwhile, scientists desperately searched for a way out. A coalition of rogue biochemists operating under the name Project Umami claimed they could synthesize flavor memory into neural implants. The idea? You eat your one food, but your brain is hacked to believe it's anything else. Pancake? No problem. Now it's duck confit. Boring tofu? Think steak. The catch? The chip only worked on happy people. Turns out, if you were too sad, the brain rejected flavor hallucination. Most of the population failed instantly. Only 6 volunteers passed the joy test. One of them, when interviewed, just said, "I love my food. It tastes like the end of suffering." He was placed under government observation immediately. Still, in every corner of the world, people developed quiet rituals of resistance. A man in Nairobi began making edible sculptures from mashed potatoes, miniature monuments to extinct meals. A teenager in Oslo learned to sing each bite, composing a 12-hour opera titled Variations on Rice, Opus 137. A woman in Hanoi opened a funeral home for abandoned taste buds, where guests came to grieve dishes they'd never eat again. Mourners wore black aprons and left symbolic spice jars on the altar. It was equal parts satire and soul-crushing truth. And all the while, underground rumors persisted of flavor smugglers. These weren't just black market spice traders anymore. They were part of a vast, encrypted network called the menu. Whispered logins, locations written on the back of menus, and vaults hidden beneath laundromats where, if you knew the code, you could bite into contraband. A slice of apple pie. Real. Forbidden. Magnificent. It wasn't cheap. Some people sold their homes. Others offered years of digital labor in exchange for a single, perfectly spiced taco. One man claimed to have tasted butter and couldn't stop crying for 7 days. He was nicknamed the Salt Fountain and became an urban legend. And yet, not everyone chased the old ways. A strange peace began to form among a small group of people, those who had chosen their food carefully, not impulsively. These were the deliberates, the ones who had thought deeply about balance, texture, nostalgia. They weren't happy, but they weren't screaming either. They ate mindfully, almost meditatively. They spoke rarely, chewed slowly, and kept journals about mouthfeel. Their writings spread. Lines like, "I do not crave the world. I crave stillness. My lentils are my liturgy." Or what if it's not about what we lost, but how well we can notice what remains? It was either spiritual awakening or full-blown defeat, depending on your mood. But something began to shift. For the first time since the one food law passed, people weren't just surviving. They were meaning-making. In the silence after the last bite. In the ritual of washing the same dish again and again. In the boredom that, if stared at long enough, started to shimmer. Because maybe, just maybe, when everything else is stripped away, even a single spoonful can feel like a universe. It was around year 5 of the one food world order when the human imagination, previously stifled by the crushing sameness of every bite, went completely unhinged. If reality insisted on serving the same flavor on loop, then the mind would do what the tongue could not. It would remix, exaggerate, and hallucinate. Enter the food delusionists. No, not people who forgot what other food tasted like. These were people who rejected the very idea that there had ever been other food. They insisted the one food was all there had ever been. "We've always had toast," one proclaimed confidently during a televised debate, while wearing a necklace made of bread crusts and an expression of religious ecstasy. Variety is a myth. Like dragons, or polite landlords, these deniers of diversity began reshaping history. They edited cookbooks, turning once famous dishes into vague legends. Did you know Caesar salad was a Roman general's war rations? Spaghetti was a kind of ancient rope. Ice cream? No, you're thinking of cold yogurt paste, invented to punish liars. Their version of history caught on because, quite frankly, everyone was too tired to argue. It was easier to believe the world had always been this bland than to remember how spicy it used to be. Meanwhile, underground food fiction flourished. A new literary genre called taste punk exploded in popularity. These were stories about alternate realities where characters could consume forbidden combinations: strawberries with cream, eggs and bacon, curry with naan. Critics called it dangerous escapism. Fans called it survival. The most popular novel of the decade? The Last Buffet. It followed a rogue scientist who discovers a time machine built into a vending machine and travels back to when you could order combo meals. The final chapter described in meticulous detail the act of eating nachos with guacamole. It was banned in 67 countries and downloaded 80 million times in a week. Yet not all rebellion was artistic. Some was practical. A new crime wave emerged: flavor mules. These were people who swallowed capsules filled with illegal ingredients before border crossings, hoping to digest them later and extract the molecular memories of taste. It was high risk, low reward, and medically idiotic, but desperate times make desperate gourmands. Then came the suicides of spice. A handful of radicals decided if they couldn't eat what they loved, they'd become it. One man jumped into a vat of chili powder and declared himself the final flavor. Another woman legally changed her name to Paprika and married a dried herb packet in a ceremony broadcast live to over 2 million weeping viewers. The officiant wore a chef's hat and said, "You may now sniff the bride." But amid the absurdity, something truly unexpected began to happen. Food itself started evolving. Scientists studying the long-term effects of mono diets discovered a phenomenon they couldn't explain. People who had been eating the same thing for years, decades even, began reporting subtle changes. A hint of sourness where there was none before. A crisp edge that didn't used to exist. Some speculated it was psychosomatic. Others believed it was adaptive mutation. But the most popular theory was simple and strange. The food is listening. Yes, according to the internet, which had devolved into 40% conspiracy forums and 60% photos of gray food, the one foods themselves were evolving in response to emotional energy. You missed chocolate hard enough? Your mashed potatoes might just start whispering a hint of cocoa. Loved mangoes in your past life? That rice pudding might just give you a flicker of tropical rebellion. Naturally, this led to the rise of food whisperers. These were self-proclaimed empaths who said they could coax flavor from your food through intention. Stir it clockwise while thinking of birthday cake, said one. Eat with your non-dominant hand while humming the national anthem of Thailand, advised another. Some swore it worked. Most just got dizzy and sticky. But faith in flavor had become a new kind of religion. Of course, religion wasn't going to sit this one out either. Some sects declared the one food a divine test. God boiled the buffet into a single item to cleanse our gluttony, preached one televangelist while throwing packets of powdered soup into the crowd like holy water. Others viewed the mono meal as punishment. This is what happens when brunch becomes a personality. And then there were the mystics, who believed that by embracing the dish fully, body, soul, and Instagram aesthetic, they could unlock enlightenment. Or at least stop crying at lunch. But the most fascinating transformation was cultural. Traditional holidays had to be reimagined. Thanksgiving became thanks in spite of giving, where families gathered to eat the exact same thing they had yesterday, but with better lighting. Valentine's Day now included the ritual of bitter tasting, where lovers dipped their shared one food in lemon juice and talked about how much they missed chocolate. Birthdays became existential. What do you wish for when your cake is just a sculpted illusion made of repurposed potato? Children began singing songs that sounded cheerful but were filled with ominous subtext like, "One bite to rule the day, one plate to make you stay." They didn't understand the lyrics, but adults winced every time they heard them. And what of the rich? Predictably, they found loopholes. Elite billionaires invested in flavor simulation chambers, hyperluxury pods that used neural stimulation to trick your brain into tasting anything while physically eating your one food. You sat in a velvet chair, bit into plain rice, and your brain screamed, "Lobster thermidor." It was expensive, exclusive, and ethically shady. Even worse, it didn't actually taste better. People reported feeling even more miserable afterward, like they'd cheated on their taste buds. One review called it the culinary equivalent of kissing your ex while knowing it's a hologram. So here we are, 5 years into the flavorless dystopia. A planet full of people chewing in unison, each alone in their repetitive ritual, quietly wondering what they used to be. what it used to feel like to crave, to order something new, to look at a menu and not feel a cold wave of sadness. And yet, somehow, incredibly, we're still going. We haven't given up. We still imagine, still write fake recipes, still dream of flavor, still laugh at the absurdity of it all. Because the human spirit, it turns out, is harder to digest than anyone expected, even for a world that's only serving one dish. By the 6th year, a peculiar kind of resilience had taken hold, one that didn't look heroic or triumphant, but more like the dull-eyed persistence of someone eating dry cereal with a fork because the spoon broke and it's simply too much effort to care. Society had accepted its fate, not with a bang, but with a collective shrug. Still, under this layer of acquiescence, weird little cracks were beginning to form. The most visible of these was the rise of food performance sports. Yes, when people can't change the food, they start competing over how they eat it. Welcome to the World Monomeal Olympics, where champions eat the same dish in increasingly ridiculous ways. Competitive speed chewing, synchronized stirring, artistic plating judged like figure skating. Last year's gold medalist was a man who ate a full bowl of his designated oatmeal while suspended upside down from a ceiling fan. Commentators called it a gritty triumph of jaw and gravity. But there were darker events too, like the endurance sit, where contestants had to stare at their one food without touching it for 48 hours straight while soft music played and distant aromas were piped into the room to test their mental strength. The record was held by a woman who once ate tofu for 1,000 consecutive days and claimed to have transcended flavor altogether. When interviewed, she said only one thing: chewing is a mindset. Chefs, meanwhile, had become historians. With nothing left to cook, they turned their energy to preserving the memory of flavor through culinary theater. Whole productions reenacted ancient meals. Actors would mime chopping vegetables, searing meats, flambeing desserts, all in silence, with invisible ingredients. The audience wept. The smell of phantom garlic haunted the halls. Theaters piped in subtle kitchen sounds, sizzling pans, knives on cutting boards, someone yelling, "Where's the lamb sauce?" It was tragic. It was beautiful. It smelled faintly of onions and loss. At universities, new academic fields bloomed. Gastrology, the study of extinct meals, single food psychology, and the sociology of repetition. Philosophers debated questions like, is it still eating if it brings no pleasure? Does variety matter in a meaningless universe? And the ever-popular, if I dream of spaghetti, am I cheating on my casserole? There were now museums entirely dedicated to what was lost. The Museum of Forgotten Flavors in Berlin featured entire rooms filled with colored vapor recreations of extinct meals. You couldn't taste them, of course, but you could walk through a foggy impression of pad thai while an audio loop played slurping noises and nostalgic sighs. One visitor described it as like hugging a ghost made of chili oil. In London, the Archive of Edible Regret displayed last bites from before the ban, preserved in resin. A single onion ring, half a creme brulee, a sushi roll mid-chopstick. Each piece had a plaque, usually inscribed with a line like, "Last meal of Daniel C., who foolishly chose celery." Visitors left offerings, tiny drawings of burgers, melted candles shaped like cupcakes, salt packets with little poems written on them. Even politics had shifted. No longer divided by party or ideology, the world now separated itself into the mono-proud and the mono-mourners. The proud considered their singular food a badge of stoic honor. They believed suffering brought clarity, and their blandness made them better. They wore beige. They smiled without showing teeth. They listened to ambient soup sounds and said things like, "Every bite is an opportunity to meditate." Their anthem was a 12-minute hum. The mourners, meanwhile, were color. Loud, clashing, rebellious. They hosted underground potluck rituals where no new food was served, but everyone described their past meals in exquisite detail. One woman was known for her 30-minute ode to lasagna, delivered weeping, hands raised to the ceiling fan. No food changed hands, but by the end, everyone swore they could taste it. Children born after the transition had no frame of reference. They didn't understand why adults would gasp at old food ads or whisper the word cheddar like it was a spell. For them, food was function. They spoke of nutritional input and digestion scheduling. One particularly unsettling toddler told a journalist, "My mouth is a loading dock." Flavor is a distraction. The footage went viral. The child was immediately offered a place in government. Still, the oldest among us remembered. Elderly citizens became oracles, keepers of flavor folklore. Their stories, once considered harmless nostalgia, now carried weight. People gathered around them to hear tales of brunch. A 94-year-old in Lisbon recalled an Eggs Benedict so transcendent, it made a grown man propose to a waffle. In New York, a retired chef described the feeling of flambeing bananas at a wedding reception, and the crowd stood in silence, many quietly licking their lips. And yet, despite it all, society functioned. Trains still ran. Meetings still happened. Babies were still born, swaddled in blankets that smelled faintly of their parents' designated food. People still fell in love, still argued, still danced, though the music was softer now, more restrained. Maybe from the fatigue, maybe from the garlic withdrawal. But here's the thing. Something strange had started to happen in the most unexpected of places, the human body. Nutritionists began noticing it first. Subtle changes. People whose blood chemistry had adapted so completely to one food that their bodies became more efficient. They were sleeping better. They were aging slower. One man, whose lifelong meal was lentils, hadn't had a cold in 5 years. A woman on potatoes had developed perfect cholesterol. No one knew why. Some called it evolution. Others called it denial with vitamins. And with this came a question no one wanted to ask aloud. What if we don't want to go back? What if, after all the mourning and madness and spice smuggling, we've adjusted? What if this strange new world, in all its gray repetition, has forged a kind of accidental peace? What if the chaos of choice was the real burden all along? By the 7th year, humanity stood at a quiet crossroad. Not the kind lit with fanfare or revolution, but the muted, anxious pause of someone realizing the awful soup they've been choking down for years might, possibly, be fine now. Not good, not joyous, but survivable, comfortable even, like an itchy sweater that no longer itches because your skin has grown calloused, or a bad roommate whose nonsense you've memorized to the point where you preemptively hide the spoons. In this climate of reluctant contentment, a new philosophy began to emerge. It had no formal name at first, but people began calling it flavor fatalism. Its core belief, that the freedom to choose had been overrated. That food variety had been a cruel illusion, choice masquerading as pleasure, pleasure concealing a deeper hunger that could never be satisfied. Better, they said, to accept the burden of simplicity than drown in the endless buffet of regret. Its adherents weren't zealots or maniacs. They were quiet converts. Middle-aged people with tired eyes who once raged against monotony, but now swirled their oatmeal with a spoon like monks tracing sand mandalas. They didn't speak in absolutes. They just looked at you with a faint smile and said, "It gets easier once you stop remembering." Still, there were holdouts. A growing minority, known as the restorers, had begun building illegal taste labs beneath crumbling libraries and old amusement parks. Their mission? Not to recreate food, but to recreate the idea of variety, synthetically, symbolically, emotionally. One of their experiments involved emotional pairings, triggering distinct memories while consuming the same bite, so your brain associated your mono meal with a different experience each time. Lentils while hearing waves crash, rice paired with a child's laughter, cabbage under strobe lights with heavy bass and the scent of gasoline. Early trials were unstable. One man began associating mashed potatoes with his divorce. Another became aroused by boiled carrots. Side effects were messy. More promising was olfactory immersion, the use of wearable scent emitters to trick the brain into believing the food had changed. People wearing tiny nose pods walked around smelling like Korean barbecue while eating tofu. Some called it progress. Others called it cruelty. Most couldn't tell the difference anymore. Then came the biggest cultural shift since the flavor ban, the first one-food baby. A child born into a world where his parents, both toast lifers, had eaten nothing but toast for over 7 years. He was raised on toast, taught to brush his teeth with toast-adjacent paste, rocked to sleep to the sound of toast popping from smart toasters. When asked what he wanted for his birthday, he replied, without irony, a different kind of crust. He became a symbol, accidentally. Some hailed him as the next phase of human adaptation, a child without memory of options, thriving in the tyranny of sameness. Others called it a tragedy, The memes, of course, were relentless. Toast spawn, Lord of the Crumbs, yeast mode activated. One TikTok video had him dancing with buttered arms, soundtracked by dramatic violin. He smiled. He didn't know why it was funny. As generations aged, a disturbing trend emerged: flavor amnesia. The elderly were forgetting what things had once tasted like. Not metaphorically, literally. One woman burst into tears mid-interview because she could no longer recall the flavor of watermelon. "I know it was red," she said. "I know it was wet. But beyond that, nothing. Just fog." Others began inventing false memories. A man swore lasagna used to be crunchy. Another claimed coffee tasted like sadness and sunshine. Neither was challenged. Who could prove them wrong? This led to flavor fiction festivals, where people gathered to describe imaginary foods. Some were based on old meals. Others were pure fantasy. One man read a short story about a meatball that granted wishes. A child described moon grapes that made you float slightly above the ground. A woman gave a tearful speech about egg velvet, a dish that didn't exist but felt real enough to mourn. These stories became sacred. People clutched them like family heirlooms. Not recipes, rituals. Even the economy adapted. No longer able to market based on ingredients, corporations leaned into experience branding. The food didn't change, but the story around it did. A bowl of lentils came in packaging that told you this was the meal Gandhi would have eaten while meditating under a tree. A rice cake claimed it was reverse engineered from astronaut memories. Tofu was sold as the clean canvas of your soul. Oatmeal was rebranded as time porridge. It worked. People bought more, not because they tasted difference, but because they believed there was one. In politics, candidates ran on food empathy platforms. "I, too, have eaten nothing but peas for a decade," said one senator. "And I've done so with dignity." Another promised to bring back flavor by 2047, before being dragged off stage by anti-variety protesters holding signs that read, "Taste is tyranny." By now, the idea of returning to the old world was not just impractical, it was terrifying. What if, after all this adaptation, we couldn't handle choice anymore? What if menus overwhelmed us? What if the scent of pizza caused heart attacks? Quiet studies in isolated labs began showing strange results. When offered a second flavor after years of one, subjects experienced sensory panic. Sweating, fainting. One woman screamed for 7 minutes after tasting chocolate. Not because it was bad, but because it reminded her of everything she'd buried. And that, really, was the crux of it all. It was never just about food. It was about memory, control, loss, survival. The simple act of chewing becoming the most profound expression of human resilience, and the cruelest theater of our longing. So we chewed on, not because we wanted to, but because stopping would mean confronting just how much we'd given up. And because sometimes, when the stars aligned, and the room was quiet, and the mind drifted just enough, a single spoonful, though unchanged, might taste, just for a moment, like something else. Somewhere around the 8th year of edible exile, a peculiar global trend emerged: flavor reincarnation theory. The belief that each person's chosen food contained the ghost of all meals past, trapped inside its dull exterior like culinary souls begging for release. Yes, people began to theorize that their broccoli wasn't just broccoli, it was potentially every food that had ever existed, compressed into vegetal purgatory. Philosophers and unhinged YouTubers alike argued over whether chewing slowly enough might unlock ancient flavor spirits. One viral video titled "Unlocking Lasagna from My Asparagus" showed a man humming Gregorian chants while gently stroking a steamed stalk. The comments were split evenly between spiritual testimonials and people asking if he was okay. This belief found its home in the blossoming sect of gastro-spiritualists. They didn't worship food per se, but believed it to be a karmic test. Your food is your burden, they'd whisper at group meditations, all swaying rhythmically with bowls of identical gruel in their laps. Love it, and it will love you back. They weren't entirely wrong. Some followers reported their food subtly changing after emotional breakthroughs. One man claimed his cabbage developed a nutty aftertaste after he forgave his father. Was it real? Was it just trauma seasoning? Who could say? Meanwhile, as society leaned deeper into its delusions, a rare few pushed in the opposite direction: the literalists. Literalists rejected all metaphor, all emotional projection. all poetic coping. To them, food was food, nothing more. They measured nutrients with mathematical precision. They chewed 32 times per bite. They refused to describe meals in anything but numeric codes. A literalist breakfast sounded like this. I consumed 78 grams of substance alpha with 2.1 grams of sodium. Result, gastrointestinal continuity achieved. Their homes were beige, their utensils stainless. Their dreams, presumably, were spreadsheets. Naturally, they were the most feared group in the world. But among the rest of us, somewhere between the spiritually starved and the stoically surrendered, there remained one last, strange cultural frontier: imaginative gastronomy. This was less about cooking and more about world-building. People began crafting imaginary meals so vivid, so intricate, that others claimed to taste them by proxy. One woman wrote a novella about a sandwich made with bread that sang when sliced. Another man hosted weekly audio banquets, where he described fictional five-course meals in excruciating detail, down to the crunch of lettuce and the way sorbet felt when melting down your throat during a breakup. Listeners swore they tasted every word. It became a new art form. Some called it flavor casting. Others, gastronarrative therapy. The most famous practitioner, a recluse known only as the Oracle of Sauce, produced ASMR-style recordings that induced drooling, faint euphoria, and once, allegedly, a spontaneous mozzarella hallucination. Governments, of course, grew concerned. They saw this as taste treason. They banned certain adjectives: creamy, zesty, succulent. Anyone caught whispering roasted or umami in public could be fined or assigned to a week of plain rice contemplation. Predictably, the bans only made the words more seductive. Secret societies formed to exchange forbidden descriptors. Whisper networks bloomed, with members rating each other on sensory accuracy. There was something thrilling about telling someone, in the dead of night, that your dream burger was smeared with melted cheddar and a hint of despair. Meanwhile, children who'd grown up entirely in this one food era developed quirks. They didn't miss variety. How could they? But they did exhibit strange imaginative behaviors. Some refused to eat unless their food had a personality. "The spoon won't go in unless I apologize to Mr. P," said one toddler, solemnly patting a pile of green mush. Others refused to eat their meals unless served upside down, or by someone wearing a cat costume, or only after being sung to in rhyming couplets. Psychologists debated whether this was trauma, adaptation, or simply the logical result of trying to find joy in a world designed for none. But as time passed, one thing became clear: something in people was breaking. Quietly, subtly, like a chair leg cracking under the weight of too many sighs. People forgot how to crave. They forgot how to imagine new things. They didn't miss flavor, they missed missing. The hunger for variety had once been a wound. Now it was a scar they barely felt. In cities, streets once lined with restaurants were now home to mono-dispensaries. Clinical, sterile, emotionless structures where citizens collected their daily portion. There was no menu, no smell, no sound, just gray walls, efficient queues, and the dull chime of industrial machinery portioning your edible destiny. The idea of dining had become nostalgic fiction. And yet, somewhere, deep in the Earth's crust, beneath layers of history and concrete, rumors began to surface about a hidden place. A forgotten bunker built by chefs, hoarders, flavor scientists, who'd refused to surrender when the one food law took effect. They called it the pantry. It was said to contain seeds, spices, preserved recipes, cooking tools, and perhaps most blasphemous of all, choice. Nobody knew where it was. Some claimed it was in the Swiss Alps. Others said it was disguised as a grain silo in Iowa. A few swore it existed only in the digital subconscious of every person who ever truly savored a croissant. But the idea, just the idea, began to spread like wildfire. People started dreaming again, not of actual meals, but of what it would feel like to decide. To open a cupboard and not know what you wanted until the smell hit you. To say, no, not that tonight. To be surprised. To be wrong. To taste something and regret it, then taste something else and rejoice. And in that dreaming, something shifted. Maybe hope, maybe hunger, maybe both. By the 9th year, that small ember of imagined rebellion had grown into a smoldering psychological insurrection. Not in the streets. Those were still quiet, clean, and lined with the scentless sigh of nutritional compliance. No, the uprising was happening in the subconscious, in the dreams of billions, in the tiny twitch of a tongue remembering the curve of a lollipop, in the involuntary shiver when someone whispered, "Barbecue." People weren't speaking out loud anymore. They were tasting in their sleep. It began with isolated incidents. One man in Prague reported vivid dreams of chewing bubblegum that never lost its flavor. A child in Peru woke up sobbing because she dreamed of biting into a mango so juicy it flooded her school. A grandmother in Istanbul sat up one night and shouted, "There was cinnamon. I swear on my arthritis, there was cinnamon." Scientists called it gustatory echoing, a delayed, neurological rebound effect caused by prolonged monodieting, a kind of flavor PTSD. Religious leaders called it mouth prophecy. Flavor conspiracy forums simply called it the tingle. Then it escalated. A rash of people began developing phantom taste syndrome, sensations of flavor that had no source. A man would suddenly taste peanut butter during a board meeting and burst into tears. A woman claimed her tongue went full lemon tart every time she heard the word committee. Others experienced rolling flavor hallucinations during emotional moments, anxiety that tasted like pickles, nostalgia like roast chicken, heartbreak like burnt marshmallow. It was a mess, but it was alive. And so, predictably, governments panicked. They launched a countermeasure called Operation Palate Lock, a neurochemical implant promised to suppress all non-sanctioned taste signals. It was voluntary. At first, they pitched it as kindness. Protect yourself from false flavor. End the torment of memory. No more cheese flashbacks. By year's end, 40% of the population had one. By the next, 70%. It worked. Too well. The people who received it stopped dreaming entirely. They became calmer, quieter. Their eyes stopped darting during conversations. They no longer sniffed at the air, hoping to catch an illegal whiff of curry. They just chewed, slept, worked, repeated. But the rest, the ones who refused, formed the palate underground. This was no longer about restoring food. It was about preserving the right to imagine it. These rebels painted murals of mythical meals on underpasses. They released illegal podcasts describing forbidden desserts in lurid detail. Imagine biting into a cloud soaked in chocolate. One voice whispered in a static-filled episode titled The Forbidden Ganache. They held midnight vigils where people sat in silence, each holding an invisible fork, remembering. One vigil ended with someone quietly mouthing the word spaghetti and 34 others weeping. And then, on a Tuesday that seemed ordinary in every possible way, it happened. The leak. Someone uploaded a file. Just one. Encrypted, bouncing through thousands of routers and hidden behind memes of dancing cats. But when decoded, it revealed blueprints. Recipes. Full-color photos of spices. Temperature charts. Fermentation cycles. Menus. It was unmistakable. The pantry was real. The world didn't explode. It trembled. Like a sleepwalker just realizing the floor is lava. Like someone cracking open a sealed jar and smelling childhood inside. But fear came fast. The government declared the file treasonous. Downloading it became a felony. Whispering about it, a misdemeanor. Denial campaigns launched immediately. Fake food. Deep chew hoax. No such thing as oregano. But the damage was done. The idea had grown teeth. People began disappearing. Not en masse, but enough to notice. Coworkers who had that haunted, craving look in their eyes were suddenly on extended leave. Neighbors who painted smells on their fences were never seen again. One street artist named Vanilla Jim posted his final creation, a mural of a child blowing bubbles shaped like steak. Below it, the words, "I remember." No one knew who was behind the pantry network. Some claimed it was rogue chefs. Others said it was AI, the last remnants of a defunct recipe generator gone sentient. A few believed it was aliens, trying to remind humans what joy tasted like before taking over. Whoever it was, they had a mission, to awaken the human tongue. And they started small. Boxes began appearing on doorsteps, unmarked, unlabeled. Inside, one spice. Just one. A jar of cumin. A stick of cinnamon. A lemon. Nothing more. But the people who received them didn't eat them. They smelled them. Wept. Passed them around like sacred relics. One family spent 3 hours just holding a basil leaf. And it was enough. The mere existence of difference lit a fuse. It wasn't about flavor anymore. It was about the audacity to remember, to say, this used to mean something, to believe, against every law and implant and regulation, that somewhere in the dust of history, there still existed a world where you could wake up, look in your fridge, and say, what do I feel like today? We weren't there yet. But for the first time in nearly a decade, it didn't feel impossible. It felt inevitable. By the 10th year, the world had split, not by nations, not by class, not even by taste, but by memory. On one side were those who remembered flavor and refused to let go. On the other, those who had forgotten, or worse, had chosen to forget. And between them, an unspoken war brewed, not with guns or walls, but with spices smuggled in hollowed-out books, with recipes passed hand to trembling hand like resistance poetry, with glances exchanged across sterile dining halls as one person dared to sniff their food before eating. The authorities doubled down. They renamed food. Grain substitute 14, protein matrix C, starch gel A. They removed texture from packaging, banned color variety, even limited chew duration. Every bite had to be swallowed in under 7 seconds. Flavor was no longer a taboo. It was an enemy of the state. Meanwhile, the pantry movement had gone viral in the oldest sense. It couldn't be contained. Children with no recollection of pre-banned food began drawing imaginary dishes in school. One boy sketched volcano noodles, a dish that burned your mouth and cooled its seconds later with mint mist. His teacher confiscated the paper, but by lunch, the drawing was on 6,000 message boards and 4 t-shirts. People were no longer asking if variety would return. They were asking when. And then, in the dead of night, a broadcast hijacked every screen, every speaker, every earbud on earth. A simple video. Black screen. A low hum. Then a whisper. Are you still hungry? Cut to a fork. Silver. Spinning slowly in the air. Then silence. The internet melted. Governments issued statements blaming rogue hackers, foreign agitators, defective kitchen appliances. But it didn't matter. The seed had already sprouted. People were no longer hoping. They were planning. What followed became known as the retasting. It didn't happen with riots. There was no grand culinary explosion. It was slower, quieter, one household at a time. A man in Argentina grew tomatoes in secret, used them to flavor his otherwise legal starch cube. A woman in Norway found an ancient pepper grinder and dusted her lentils. A group in Seoul developed a scent-based VR headset that let you taste kimchi by stimulating memory centers. They wore it while eating plain rice and cried openly. Then, one day, in a small, nameless town, a child took a bite of something unfamiliar, smiled, and said, "What's this?" Her parents froze, not because she asked, but because they realized they didn't know the answer. They'd made something new, an accident, a mutation of flavor caused by improvised fermentation and a rogue pinch of spice. It was sour, strange, alive. It spread like wildfire. Not the food itself, but the courage. Suddenly, people began creating again, blending, baking, breaking the mold, sometimes literally. No one was quite sure what they were eating anymore, but they knew one thing. It wasn't the same. And that difference, that whisper of unpredictability, tasted better than any feast remembered. At first, the authorities cracked down. They raided underground flavor labs, jailed chefs for culinary incitement, burned cookbooks in town squares. But it was too late. Even among the enforcers, whispers of dissent grew. One inspector was caught licking oregano off a seized counter. Another admitted to accidentally smelling paprika twice. The tipping point came when a government official was caught baking a pie. A pie. It made global headlines. People wept, not because they could taste it, but because someone had bothered to make it. That act of kneading, slicing, seasoning, hoping, was more subversive than any protest. It reminded the world that to cook is to believe in a future worth tasting. The ban wasn't repealed. It simply died, quietly, like a forgotten fad. Over time, markets reopened. Not all at once, not in every country, but gradually. First spices, then sauces, then small batch cheeses, experimental pastas, hybrid fruits. People rediscovered joy one dish at a time. The first legal lasagna sold in nearly a decade was auctioned off for $1 million and promptly eaten by a grandmother on live TV. She sobbed for 45 minutes. And as variety returned, so did something else, uncertainty. People had grown used to knowing what every bite would bring. Now, they didn't. Sometimes the food was bad. Sometimes it clashed, burned, failed, made people sick, made them gasp, made them feel. There was chaos again. There was risk. But above all, there was choice. In the end, it wasn't flavor that saved us. It was the possibility of flavor. The radical idea that joy shouldn't be rationed. That taste isn't a luxury. It's proof we're alive. And that every bite we take is a reminder. Sameness may be safe, but variety is what makes us human. And that, dear listener, is what happens when you ask, what if you could only eat one food for the rest of your life? This has been What If Horizons. If this flavor of thought fed your curiosity, share it, review it, and don't forget to come hungry for the next episode.